I remember attending the first round of her match, which was a tough match at the U.S. Open, and then I went back home, and then I was contemplating coming back, and I wanted to witness her win because I think she has...
Maria Sharapova doesn't hand out compliments casually. 5 Grand Slams, former world #1, a career built on a standard of excellence that made her one of the most demanding evaluators of talent the sport has ever produced. When she speaks about a rising player, the tennis world pays attention because she has seen everything, competed against everyone, and has no reason to say anything she doesn't mean. She just spoke about Alex Eala at length, and what she said goes considerably deeper than praise. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's get into everything she said and why it matters as much as it does.
I think she has such an amazing head on her shoulders and the game, and I think she has a voice and a platform that's going to, transcend the sport. And as we know now...
Start with the moment that revealed how seriously Sharapova has been watching this. She attended Eala's first-round match at the U.S. Open in person, watched it from the stands, then went home. And then, and this is the part that tells you everything, she contemplated coming back. Not to watch a featured match on Arthur Ashe, not to attend a marquee evening session, to come back specifically because she wanted to witness Eala win. Because she felt, having watched her up close, that she was watching someone whose impact on the sport was going to extend well beyond what a scoreline could measure. Sharapova said Eala has a voice and a platform that is going to transcend the sport. That phrase, transcend the sport, is doing a specific amount of work. Sharapova isn't talking about rankings or Grand Slam titles or year-end finishes. She's talking about the kind of impact that outlasts results. The kind that changes what the sport looks like culturally, commercially, and representationally. The kind that makes people who had never watched tennis before suddenly feel like they have a reason to.
It is not just tennis, it's fashion, it's art, it's culture, it's having a platform, and I think she does brilliantly of merging all of those together.
From Maria Sharapova, that is not a throwaway observation. That is a 5-time Grand Slam champion identifying something she recognizes from having lived it herself. Sharapova also made a point about representation that the tennis world needs to sit with for a moment, because it's the most structurally significant thing she said. She pointed out that tennis has historically been dominated by players from Europe and North America. That observation isn't controversial, it's simply accurate. The sport's biggest stars across the Open era have overwhelmingly come from a narrow geographic band. When Asian players have broken through, Li Na at the French Open, Naomi Osaka's Grand Slam run, the cultural response has been enormous precisely because it happens so rarely and means so much when it does. Sharapova said Eala is representing Asia in a way that inspires millions of people who may have never felt represented in professional tennis before. That she isn't just building a career for herself, she is opening doors for an entire generation of young players across the continent who now have a reason to believe the top of the sport is accessible to them. That is a structural argument about the future of the WTA. It's not about one player's trajectory, it's about what happens to the pipeline of talent when a region of hundreds of millions of people suddenly has a genuine flag bearer competing at the highest level. The interest compounds. The investment follows. The next generation of players who grow up watching Eala are different from the generation that grew up without that reference point. Sharapova has experienced the weight of regional representation throughout her own career. She understands from the inside what it means when millions of people see themselves in an athlete's journey. And she is saying explicitly that Eala is doing that for Asia right now. But Sharapova's praise wasn't limited to the cultural dimension. She went specifically into the mentality, and the way she framed it revealed exactly how carefully she has been watching. She talked about the balance between victories and defeats. She said the players who find longevity at the top of the sport are the ones who don't treat victories as the ceiling or defeats as the floor, who don't get so high after winning that the inevitable losses become crushing, who maintain what she described as the sweet spot, the emotional equilibrium that keeps you functional, consistent, and present regardless of the scoreline. And then she said, Eala already has it. At 20 years old, in her first full year competing at the WTA 1000 level, navigating the biggest crowds of her career and the heaviest expectations her country has ever placed on a tennis player, she already has the emotional balance that Sharapova is describing. That assessment carries specific weight because Sharapova is talking about something she developed across years of competing. She's not describing a technical skill that can be coached in a practice session. She's describing a psychological architecture that most players spend the first half of their careers trying to build. Sharapova is saying Eala walked in with it already in place. What makes Sharapova's comments land differently from the standard praise a rising player receives is the history between them, because the respect runs in both directions. Eala has spoken openly and repeatedly about growing up watching Sharapova. She has named her as her favorite player, as the player she most wanted to emulate on court growing up, as the career she studied and drew inspiration from during the years when she was still developing her own game.
Up to in terms of your game style, like you're wanting to kind of emulate them on the court?
Definitely. Growing up, my absolute favorite was Maria Sharapova. I guess I loved her grit and just obviously the way she styled herself and the way she carried herself.
Think about what that full circle moment looks like. A young girl in the Philippines watching Sharapova win Grand Slams on television, deciding she wanted to follow that path, building herself into a professional player good enough to compete on the same courts Sharapova competed on, and then having Sharapova sit in the stands specifically to watch her, go home, and come back because she wanted to see her win. That narrative doesn't need embellishment. It is already everything a sports story should be. And the fact that Sharapova has apparently been involved in Eala's development well before the public breakthrough, offering guidance and insight during the early stages of her career, adds another layer to a relationship that looks less like a veteran observing a newcomer and more like a direct passing of something from one generation to the next. Sharapova also said something that cuts to the heart of what separates players who have a good year from players who build something lasting. She described tennis as more than just a sport. She said it's fashion, art, culture, and platform, and that the players who understand how to merge all of those things together are the ones whose influence extends beyond any single result. And then she said Eala does it brilliantly. That observation is specific. Sharapova built one of the most recognizable personal brands in the history of women's sports. She understood instinctively that what happened off the court shaped the context for what happened on it. That the attention she commanded gave her leverage that pure tennis results alone couldn't provide. She's looking at Eala and seeing the same understanding operating naturally, without calculation, in someone 2 decades younger. The evidence is already visible. The sold-out practice courts at Indian Wells. The day-in-the-life video pulling 100,000 views while Grand Slam champions struggled to break 5 digits on the same channel. Fans planning dinners around match schedules and taking out monthly broadcast subscriptions specifically to follow one player. The WTA putting her face on their Class of 2026 graphic alongside 8 top 10 veterans. That is not tennis talent alone doing that work. That is a player who understands, consciously or instinctively, that what she represents is larger than any individual match. Sharapova recognizes it because she lived a version of it herself, and she's saying out loud that Eala is already operating at that level. Sharapova wasn't the only established voice adding weight to this conversation this week. Jessica Pegula, top 10 player, someone with credibility built across years of competing at the highest level, made her own position clear after the Indian Wells exit.
Alex is amazing. Hopefully she's the next podcast guest and we can kind of get to know her and talk to her more. But the way that she's been able to pack stadiums and the way that her country supports her is something special, and she handles it, I feel like, so maturely and with such grace, and she just seems so appreciative of all the support she gets, and always seems to have a good head on her shoulders and a good attitude about it.
Pegula said one result doesn't define who a player is. She said the bigger picture, the energy Eala brings to the tour, the fans she draws into the sport, the atmosphere she creates in venues that had been running the same format for years, is the actual story. Not a single round of 16 exit. The trajectory, the impact, the thing that keeps growing regardless of any individual scoreline. Novak Djokovic added his voice to the same conversation, saying Eala is great to watch on television, but even better in person. From someone who has competed against the greatest players across multiple generations, that framing, better in person, is significant. It means the presence isn't manufactured for cameras. It's real. It fills rooms. It changes the atmosphere of a venue just by existing in it. When Sharapova, Pegula, and Djokovic are all pointing at the same player within the same week, it's not a chorus of courtesy. It's the sport's most credible voices telling you something about the future. Here's the full picture then. Maria Sharapova, 5 Grand Slams, former world number 1, one of the most demanding evaluators of talent the sport has produced, sat in the stands at the US Open specifically to watch Alex Eala play. Went home, came back because she wanted to see her win, and then said publicly that Eala has a voice and a platform that will transcend the sport, that she represents Asia in a way that opens doors for an entire generation, and that her mentality is already operating at the level of someone far beyond her years. That is the full weight of what was said. Not praise from a commentator filling airtime, not a courtesy compliment from a peer trying to be diplomatic. A 5-time Grand Slam champion identifying something she recognizes from having lived it herself, and saying so on the record. Eala is heading to Miami with a career-high ranking, 2 months of momentum, and the endorsement of the player she grew up wanting to become. The story that Sharapova says is going to transcend the sport is just getting started. Hit like, subscribe, and drop your take in the comments. Is Sharapova right? Does Eala have what it takes to become a genuine icon for the sport? This conversation is only going to get bigger.